Hello and welcome to the Life Made Mobile podcast from Oracle, a conversation about mobile, software development and digital innovation. We'll cover a range of topics from digital strategy to digital product design, software development to emerging technologies, all through the lens of digital culture. David Lowe and I will be your hosts, and we'll be talking to a range of interesting industry insiders from the world of digital health and financial services to understand more about their process, their products and their platforms. For anyone who doesn't know Oracle, Oracle are a software development agency who make lives better through mobile technologies. Our talented teams of technologists solve complex problems for our innovative clients in healthcare and finance. And today, David, we're going to be talking about three topics which are close to my heart. First, crypto in the form of non-fungible tokens, design in relation to our conversation with Kevin last week, and Apple products, which is actually a lie because I'm a die-hard Android fan. How does that sound?
That's very good, and good day to everyone, wherever you are.
So we know the drill by now. When we don't have a guest, it's 30 minutes, three topics, and all views are our own and do not necessarily represent the views of Oracle as a business. With all that being said and done, the first question, and I suppose discussion point, is going to be around non-fungible tokens or NFTs, very buzzy thing in the space right now. And I suppose just before we kind of launch into talking about it, David, I think it's probably useful for people who aren't necessarily aware of what a non-fungible token is to try and explain what an NFT is. So I will do my best. So they're a unique token generated on a blockchain through a smart contract that assigns ownership and defines the rules of that ownership transferability. But I mean, what that means really in layman's terms, when I speak to my friends about it and try and explain it to them, I use this analogy. If you think about how you buy a house, you employ a solicitor to broker an exchange of deeds between two parties to transfer the ownership of the property from one party to another. So in buying a house, actually what you're doing is just exchanging legal documentation alongside a pot of money. So if you think about an NFT as this, it's just a digital contract as a representation of ownership. And I suppose where it is at the moment is that it's creating a range of different marketplaces for digital representations of art, product, and numerous other things, which we'll get into in a moment. So my question to you, David, was with everyone in the world from Mike Tyson to Jack Dorsey, Gary Vaynerchuk to Steph Curry jumping on the NFT bandwagon, when do you think the hype will die down and we'll actually be able to have a proper conversation about the kind of innovative use cases of this kind of nascent technology?
It's funny you mentioned Gary V along the way, because I thought it'd be nice just to get into this. You're way ahead of me on this whole craze, as it were. And so I looked up Gary V's view of NFTs just to get the 1 minute bullet of what this is all about. So if I can play back his version of it, it's not quite what you just said, but I guess the fundamentals are the same. So he said straight away that if you imagine buying something in a video game, such as a power-up or a weapon or something. And this came to mind because my son asked me for £20 the other night to buy a virtual gun in something or other. It's the sense of having the clout of being able to buy something because you can, and that thing to have a digital representation that is permanent. And I guess for people that do things within Minecraft and so on, to have a permanent thing that you've made and leave it behind is a good example of that. So that makes sense. And it gets into the notion of scarcity and as you just said, the reason for property and property exchange being what it is, it's a scarce asset that has a form of ownership, control over the ownership. It's the same with many companies, the way they sell their shares. You can't resell them to other people without some form of proof of change and things like that. So I get that. The thing that's most interesting to me about it is not so much the technology, it's the application of good design, which I guess we'll get to in the next segment anyway. But the more I dived into reading about NFTs, and especially about Beeple, who seems to be the main beneficiary of
the poster child, yeah.
The poster child. And he denies everything about how he makes money from this, and it's not art and it's not he kind of makes the point that it's a wave that he's riding out and doesn't hide from it, and somebody backed him to do it, and there's a payback somewhere. But then you dig into his history, and he spent most of his life designing gear for Louis Vuitton and Nike and so on. So it is actually the scarcity and, to what Gary Vee said, the clout of owning something that is driving this. And I think that's something in life that will never go away. So having gone full circle thinking, yes, this is a fad, and to your question, when will it stop? Maybe if the technology lasts, it won't. And that's as far as I got with it. But I'd be very curious to hear what you make of that end of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating space, and I think that the difficulty for a lot of people in terms of their understanding of what it is and the potential of the technology is that people see a bit of digital art, and they see that represented as like a JPEG, and they're like, how can you own a piece of art on the internet? I can right click save as, and I have that digital art as much as you do. Now, I suppose that's like saying I can go to a shop and buy a print of a Matisse, and I've got a Matisse just like you do, but one is the actual Matisse, and there is proof of ownership, and there's provenance, and there's a structure of meaning, and I suppose inherent kind of value within that thing that is separate from the print. And I suppose that the argument that I always try and make to people is that, NFTs as collectibles and as digital art are really only kind of scratching the surface. One of the most interesting stories that I read about and have heard about is, so there's a company in Ireland, I forget the name of the distillery now, who they've been producing whiskey for, nearly 100 years. And what's the biggest problem with whiskey is that, you distill it on day one, and you can't do anything with it pretty much for like 5 to 10 years. So there's like a huge capital outlay, and, there's basically no return for a long period of time. And there was a company in Ireland who minted the first NFT, and it was on a rare and I think 21-year-old cask of whiskey. And so there's a digital representation of that ownership on the blockchain, but there's also an actual cask of whiskey. And so, the distillery got, I think it was like £150,000 worth of capital, which they could invest in redeveloping some of their distillery. And someone now owns a digital asset, which they can trade online. But at some point, if anyone who buys that digital asset wants to get it bottled, they can hand in the NFT and get the cask from the warehouse or get bottles. And so that, in my thinking, was like a good example of how NFTs could create cash flow where there was previously no opportunity for cash flow, and also could create a marketplace for sort of high-end real-world goods, where actually previously things like that you would have to like go to Christie's and pay a listing fee and pay marketing fees, and you'd have to get the right people in the room, and you'd have to hope the auction met the reserve price and everything like that. And all of that now happens on a digital platform with really just, gas fees if it's on Ethereum or the relevant blockchains being the fees that are in place. So I think that there's an element of it could move in the direction of sort of democratizing sort of luxury real world assets and how we trade them as a store of value.
It made me think the other night, I was watching a documentary about somebody making Lynn hi-fi and Lynn turntables that start at $3,500 or thereabouts, and somebody that customizes the chassis into other forms of wood, and everyone's unique. And it made me think that, because we were coming into this chat, that would be something, given every one of them is a unique, essentially you're buying an heirloom for yourself that you want to pass on. That would be a good use for it, because the provenance of you creating that in the first place through the person who made it back to you, if you want to make an asset out of it, that makes sense. But it made me think, and everything you've just said about, it's really a way of protecting IP for a person who originates something. And I get that that's a way. IP is often a way to unlock cash flow, as you say. So in the case of the whiskey, it's more that anybody could buy that NFT and presumably reuse it through another distillery in some fashion? Or is it that only the distillery knows what the NFT contains, so the right is to go back to them to unlock and make use of it? You see what I mean?
So the smart contract is set up as such that it's a ownership deed for a real world companion to the digital asset. So the digital asset can be traded as many times as it wants to be traded, and I think there'll possibly be like a copyright percentage. So as it's traded, there's some kind of kickback to the distillery. Yep. But then at the point where one person who is in sort of ownership of the digital deed decides that they want to transfer the digital deed to the physical product, they burn the token and the bottles would come out to them. So I think
that's what I'm getting at. So in terms of the person who ends up with the right to burn the token and unlock the whiskey effectively, they don't know what's in the whiskey. They're just buying the right to find out. Is that right? I'm trying to...
It's a specific lot. It's a 21-year-old cask of single grain Irish whiskey, and so it's a particular lot. So there is like it's an individual cask related to an individual token. So it's not necessarily you're just buying a digital asset related to any one of the casks, and it's like there is a cask that is actually your cask or that NFT's cask, so to speak.
Yeah, so it's almost like somebody discovering a diamond and trading on the value of it, and it sits in a vault until somebody decides to make rings out of it. I mean,
100%.
Yeah, scarce assets is what it always comes back to. So yeah, I mean that took it back to the hi-fis and so on. And if somebody wants to make a £50,000 record player that's got gold plate around it and stick it in a place where nobody sees until the thing's traded until the point it's scarce enough that somebody does want to cash it in, that starts to make sense in physical goods. So it's protecting the IP of a physical good and the access to it, which is ultimately what any physical material scarce good is about, I suppose. Yeah. Then it starts to make sense to me rather than buying pixelated guns and stuff. Yeah.
Well, totally. And I mean, there's some fascinating use cases, but I was sort of joking with a friend the other day when I said that I was like, what if NFTs are just Star Wars Tazos? Do you remember Star Wars Tazos? You know, those little things that you collected like walkers. But his point was, he was like, collectibles is just a tiny proportion of the market. And actually, the interesting thing that point that you made about gaming is that I think one of the sort of brand use cases that I've seen is that Coca-Cola worked with a fashion designer to design a Coca-Cola jacket. So it's like a big puffer jacket, Coca-Cola branded and whatnot. It's a one of one. And they sold it as an NFT, the digital ownership for that jacket. But your avatar in Decentraland, which is a metaverse sort of VR, AR gaming space, can wear that jacket.
Right.
And you're the only person, because you own that NFT, that can wear that jacket. So to your point, it's digitally scarce, and there is a place where you can actually engage with it in the sort of virtual world. And a lot of the sort of I suppose the ideas behind, where we might head in terms of having kind of avatars in some kind of metaverse community, is that there might be clout related to wearing Balenciaga or Louis Vuitton when you are with your kind of HoloLens in your bedroom.
But it might go down a whole different road, that it democratizes the industry of avatars and how people exist in sort of meta lives, if you like. So if you wear your Balenciaga jacket in, I'm going to say Minecraft, because it's always first in my head, and then take it into something else, then you travel with it, and it's only you that can travel with it, which is maybe not something that games companies like, but if it engages kids, then they will give it a go.
Yeah, totally. And to your point on Minecraft, there's an interesting example called Sandbox, and I haven't looked into it properly at the moment, but it's essentially at the moment they're selling land as NFTs so that you can become a landowner within a Minecraft type universe, represented as individual unique NFTs. And I suppose that is where my head goes sometimes to think about, what if instead of having kind of old day world day contracts which a solicitor reads out to you and are stored somewhere which you never have access to, what if in the future we could have like fractionalized home ownership by writing a bunch of smart contract NFTs and trading homes person to person, peer to peer, rather than having to have like this whole network of kind of intermediaries. I mean, that's a big step, but I suppose that that's where my head goes in some respects about where the future of these kind of technologies could go.
I think there's an ocean of vested interest that lies between that and your ideal, but give it time.
Yeah, you're totally right. Did you read up on the Banksy or Pranksy NFT sort of PR prank yet? I mean, what's your thoughts? Do you think well orchestrated PR prank or actual sort of smart hack?
I'm coming down on the side of a hack, a genuine hack, the more I look at it. And I think there was something the other day that Pranksy got their money back, having started to resort to the law. Somebody put their hands up to it. So I think it's coming down, unless that's an extension of the PR, which it may well be. But I think given what happened, and it was so unrealistic at the start from everything. I'm not a huge fan of Banksy, I must admit, but knowing how he protects his image and all that, to have that happen as a prank sounds unlikely. And for the prankster to be pranked is even less likely, I think. So I'm coming down on the side of the hack, but you may differ.
I think you're right, and I think the difficulty, I suppose, with the whole sort of cryptocurrency space is that people sort of see like new tokens and new projects in a lot of respects as kind of Ponzi schemes, and it's the idea that like you get in early is how you make the money. And so the difficulty is that you've got a lot of people sitting with with digital assets and and a trigger finger, and so they're not doing the right research. They're not thinking about what the long-term kind of outcomes might be of investing in an asset class or investing in a nascent technology. And I think if you're young and you're looking to 10x your digital assets, you see Banksy pop up.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that it went for $330,000 is mind-blowing. But I suppose if you look at any of the projects that are really hyped at the moment in that, especially in the kind of NFT avatar space, they're changing hands for outrageous amounts of money at the moment.
I think there's a tangent to go down, which I'll try not to. But if you think about the whole GameStop affair at the start of the year and pumping a stock, I still think a lot of that was driven by behavior of people who had some reminiscence for game shops, and more than or as much as the drive to bring down Wall Street and all that. I think a lot of people just rode the wave because it ultimately helped GameStop quite a lot, because a lot of that value stayed in the company once it came out of lockdown. So yeah, I think there is some behavioral science to explore in that, which I think we'll get to in the next segment anyway. And I rode that out long enough to buy a curry, I must admit, just to play about with the trigger finger and see where it got me to. But for the sake of 20 pounds or so, it was good fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Goodness me. We could definitely do a whole episode about that, but I'll move on to sort of topic two. So obviously we spoke to Kevin last week, who's our head of design strategy, and I was watching Abstract, the Art of Design, which had an episode about Ian Spalter, who's the head of design for Instagram. And they were talking through a range of kind of innovations that had happened in the space of kind of interface design and user experience. And one of the people that spoke to was Asa Raskin, who's the inventor of the Infinite Scroll. And I thought it was an interesting example of digital product design solving for a user problem, but actually generating an unintended consequence of addictive kind of doom scrolling. And I was just thinking, do you think that as digital product design develops as a discipline and as we mature as software designers and developers, that we'll have to think more about the potential negative consequences of what we deem to be good design, like engaging design? And have you seen any of those in action in the kind of myriad of projects and programs of work that you've been involved with?
There's two things jump out, and maybe a third off the back of them. I think the first good example I can give, it back in, I'm going to say 2009, we'd built a whole system of news sites at STV and in Scotland, STV News and Sport and so on, which were driven by the sort of mid 2000s drive to get page impressions, because impressionable media was good and you tried to drive people from page to page. And by and large, it worked, and tried to do it with the right user experience. We didn't get into doom scrolling. We presented a range of things that people should be interested in, but not too many, because we wanted people to come back the next day and look, rather than spend the day and then come back in a week. That was the game. And it worked well. But then iPhone came along. And as you do, you have to put something in the App Store quickly, and under some pressure, we did that. And what we didn't realize was the actual complete behavior change by giving people something along the lines of a doom scroll, because we thought we got a whole set of content we're sitting on, give people an interface to thumb scroll it while they're on the bus.
Yep.
And we assumed people would look through 2 or 3 things, read the stories, but what they actually did was read them extremely quickly, and people started to scan things. So the session time collapsed, but the amount of content accessed went through the roof.
Wow.
And so in a sense, we moved 50% of our traffic overnight to the different user experience because people liked it. The thing that didn't cross our minds was how quickly that would happen, because it was genuinely overnight. And then secondly, how there was no commercial model in that 50% of the traffic because it was too early. There was no way to monetize iPhone back then, so early on. So we actually just gave away, for the sake of user benefit, half the commercial success of the thing we'd spent a year and a half building.
Wow.
So the user experience was too good. And I guess you have to be somewhere on the fence between paying the bills and keeping users happy. And we were lucky enough, we had a supportive board that let us ride that out until there were ways to monetize, and video was the way to do it in the end, as it turned out. But we were too good at that particular point, and it does burn you a little bit that you've been too successful. The second thing is, if you look at sites like the Daily Mail and so on, the original doom scroll, the crack navigation, as they called it. What it starts to do is the flip side of what I just said, that somebody will always spot that as a commercial opportunity. And what you start to see in the doom scroll was a doom scroll, as you find on Instagram or any of these platforms now, of people trying to sell you things, which completely ruins the experience. Now, it could be, if you look at any content-driven site now, you will find probably every second story in the doom scroll is from Taboola or somebody like that, trying to sell you fake news. You know, my favorite example, I'll need to dig out a Twitter thread at some point and share this. We were trying to find stories that contained mammoth in thing, and it was just strange. It was obviously a word transposed from the story above it into the advert. So mammoths find NFTs in Perth, using all these things that stitches together, trying to get your attention through the doom scroll, because something, as you doom scroll, has to jump out or it's pointless. Yeah. And so the extreme means people are using because of the doom scroll to get your attention are starting to become ridiculous, and ruins the point of the thing. And I think if you look at people like The Guardian and the way they've sort of got a backlash towards making people pay for the content in the most gentle way they can do it, and the New York Times has started to rule out all of that and try to understand its audience directly, and the Times does it in Britain to an extent. Yep. I think the doom scroll is starting to eat itself back to models where people pay rather than sell their attention, which is what they were doing. And I think that's been a lesson for 10 years or so, particularly in the newspaper industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you know, like I don't necessarily read broadsheets. I do try my best to, when I'm looking for news stories, to do the best I can to understand the context of the stories that I'm reading by looking at a few different outlets, to understand the potential biases that are at play in a range of different media outlets. But if I was to read one, The Guardian would be my chosen one. And the thing I find interesting is they've got this pop-up now that says, oh, you've looked at 382 articles over the last month. And I think it's difficult to justify talking like from a meta editorial standpoint about how, you know, we're having our privacy eroded, and, you know, the sort of the nastiness of internet tracking and all these bad technology companies. And then at the same time, you're basically going like, you've been on our site loads, start paying for it. You know, it's like that, I think, is like a really interesting sort of juxtaposition of what they are saying and what they're doing. And it's driven by money. And I suppose that the difficulty is that the revenue model for media now is just like, you know, and that's, you know, it's how journalists get paid. So it's how journalists write stories, and it starts to create a whole different sort of internet as we know it. I mean, the one thing I always come back to when I'm talking to people about this was, I read an article that said on Spotify, to register as a play, someone has to listen past the first 30 seconds. And so over time, we're starting to see that people are doing away with intros, and they're basically writing songs that jump straight into the chorus because they want to get you to the hooky part as quickly as possible, so that they keep you on long enough that you register as a listen and you get paid. So like the platform is changing songwriting. And I just think that we've seen that in media, where like the platforms have changed journalism, like fundamentally changed journalism because of the revenue model of the internet.
Yeah, and there's been endless ways this has been tested with video in particular. I mean, YouTube and where the skip ads start to happen and how long the skip lasts for and things like that. And in TV, Channel 4 started it a while ago by not really having ad breaks until pretty deep into the content, and then overloading them in part 4. And it's just something that people used to try and be linear and put 3 ads at 10 minutes, 3 ads at 20 and so on in the hour. But they started to go quite deep and maybe have a 6 ad break at 40 minutes because you're invested by then. And as people got into content, they didn't want a pre-roll ad putting them off getting further into it, because originally they would start 6 at the start to try and make money off you in case you didn't like it. And thankfully it's gone away from that. But you're right. I mean, it wouldn't be unusual for a left-leaning newspaper to try and guilt you into something, which is the Guardian's quite good at generally. And they're pretty effective. They know their audience. I'm not being cynical about it. They do know who they're speaking to because they're doing the research and so on. But it's people more like the New York Times that start to pioneer it to get away from the whole notion of doom scrolling and into selling high value. If you look at the Times at the weekend and the Sunday Times, they always lead with something that takes you 25, 30 minutes to read. Mm-hmm. And then you're hooked. You might read the rest of it, but you've justified your £2 to buy it online. And there's no adverts in the thing you're reading. It's a very carefully laid out version of what used to be 3 or 4 pages in the newspapers. So things are starting to go the right way, but at the more gutter end of it, where that's not possible, you will be into Mammoth buys NFT in Falkirk for quite a while yet, I think.
It's funny, and I suppose another question for you is, whenever I hear people talking about machine learning and AI, there's always the sort of understandable ethical questions around, you know, what's the end game, and, you know, people talk about the paperclip generator thing where, you know, like you know, we could have AI that could be our demise. But I suppose that you know, those ethical questions tend to really only get asked of, you know, data collection, data use, machine learning, AI. And actually, we should probably be asking those ethical questions kind of in a much broader way in technology. I mean, do you agree, or do you think that I'm off point?
No, you're absolutely right. I had a quick conversation last night with Mike Romilly, our head of emerging tech, about some of this stuff. And because Apple's coming up, as we're about to mention, and we're trying to guess what might come this year. And it bothers me every year that the whole industry around mobile phones is about grabbing your attention by any means possible and retaining it, which is really how machine learning, artificial intelligence run themselves. They are circular pieces of technology that grab you, hold you, and try to learn more and feed it back. And that's how they exist. Now, if you think about it, the thing that you're buying is distraction, and it doesn't get any smaller over time, where to me, the original point of mobile technology wasn't handsets or even the technology. It was a context you were in at a given time and being able to augment or improve it with something. It doesn't matter what the something is. But we got into this by talking about if Apple got into cars, it would be for that reason, that they want to be able to provide you with something sensory that isn't looking at a phone or a dashboard. It's something a bit deeper than that. which may be in the windscreen or something, but it's a reason to be in a moment being improved by something they have value in. So that's where I think things need to go. I don't see it happening anytime soon, but as we'll get into Apple, they're probably nearest to trying to defend people against the sort of grabbing of your time that technology endlessly tries to do.
It's interesting. I'm a big fan of Amber Case and her sort of MO around trying to get people to invent and invest in sort of cam technology, as she describes it. Just, you know, sort of her point being that we've got, you know, a device on our wrist, a device in our pocket. We're looking at a device, and there's a device sitting on our side table, and all of them are kind of pinging at the same time, and they're all trying to notify us of certain things, and all of it's very interruptive, as you say, that it's guided by trying to absorb our attention, but actually it means that we're kind of losing the ability for deep work and kind of sort of siloed focus on a particular task, because everything's just popping all the time. And I do think that in good product design, we should be thinking about how interruptive devices and their related software are at all times.
Yeah, I mean, working in Alexa a few years ago, we were getting heavily into trying to encourage addiction to it to a degree. I mean, especially when you get into having things like kids quizzes and stuff, they are going to use it every day if it goes that way, and eventually you monetize the extension of more content and things like that, which is just what phones do with games selling upgrades and power-ups and things like that, where really the whole point to some of us was it's an ambient technology that should be serving you, that at the point of you needing to do something, you know, you can shout in the room and hopefully get the answer, or at worst, it's learning what you want at given times and tells you specifically when you need something, and not because it's trying to distract you. And I think that's the model that should be serving us. But as I say, it's commercially, it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, I like the term ambient technology. It's just kind of
for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we've pretty much reached our time. So thanks so much for the valuable discussion. It's always fun to chat through these things with you.
Likewise, thank you.
So for everyone listening at home, you can find us at our website, waracle.com, and you can find us at all the relevant social channels at Waracle UK. Until we speak to you again in podcast 4, thank you so much for joining us.